Hello and welcome to Mayor Gavin Newsom's Internet Budget Town Hall. This is an opportunity for residents of San Francisco to ask questions and to really sound off about the city budget. I'm Barbara Taylor, the City Hall Bureau Chief with KCBS News Radio, and with me to offer your questions and provide a bit of perspective this afternoon is Rachel Gordon, the City Hall reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle. Now, it's our hope during the next 2 hours to have a pretty freewheeling discussion with Mayor Newsom about San Francisco's fiscal problems. They are very serious. But to do that, we really need your input. Some of you have already sent us questions for the mayor, but this is, as you know, a live podcast. So that means we'll also be taking questions throughout this internet broadcast, and we still want to hear from you. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can submit questions. I'm going to tell you what they are. If you happen to use Twitter, you can tweet Mayor Newsom using the hashtag #NewsomBudgetLive. Again, that's #NewsomBudgetLive. Now, you can also create a Ustream account if you're watching this on Ustream. You just log in, and then you can ask a question that way. And finally, there's another way on Ustream. You can go to the Facebook link, and at that point, you'll get linked to a way to ask a question. And we'll be getting all of the questions all through this 2-hour broadcast, so we'll try to ask the mayor to answer as many as you possibly can. So let's get started now by welcoming San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Rachel, both of you, for being willing to host this and to be the official arbiters of your questions. So none of them were pre-screened, and all these questions come directly from all of you. And I just want to thank those of you that tuned in today for this somewhat unprecedented discussion. I think this is the first time, certainly since I've been mayor, that we've had an interactive town hall, online at least, and I think it's an opportunity to broaden the discussion here at City Hall around the budget and what your priorities are and what you believe should be done to balance an unprecedented budget shortfall this year. And we'll get into specifically what that means in a moment. I want to, though, extend the opportunity, not just this evening to all of you, but also extend it over the course of the next few weeks and months to engage directly, to send in not just your tweets and your comments on Facebook, but to send us emails, to communicate by coming here to City Hall and participating in the public process as we deliberate between now and June 1st. Before I'm submitting a balanced budget pursuant to the charter. But again, I thank you all for taking the time to be here, and I thank the moderators for giving us the chance to make sure that this is an inclusive and interactive conversation.
So you ready for your first question?
Bring it on.
It seems like a lot of the questions we've gotten already are kind of from the nitty-gritty Muni streets and things. Other are broader policy ones. But why don't you take a moment at first just to kind of frame the issue for us, the budget problem that San Francisco is facing?
Just very briefly, the budget in San Francisco is roughly $6.6 billion. Within that budget, there's another budget. And this is the number that's important. This is the number that oftentimes doesn't get the attention it deserves. And that's $1.2 billion. That's the discretionary general fund budget. So when you hear or read about this $522.2 million budget shortfall, and that's the number, $522.2 million, it's against a $1.2 billion discretionary budget. The difference with local government, and this is the case everywhere across this state and this nation, is that we can't tax and spend, and we can't borrow and spend. Taxing only can be authorized by the voters themselves, and the borrowing is very limited in scope. So unlike the state of California, that can do bonds against their deficit, and the federal government that literally can print money, local government is forced to balance its budget in a fiscally prudent manner. If we don't, we end up like cities like, well, for example, Vallejo. So we have a responsibility to submit a balanced budget, again, by June 1st to the Board of Supervisors, and the board has the opportunity to review that budget, make recommendations and adjustments, but by no later than July 31st, that budget must be approved by the legislative branch. So between now and August 1st, in essence, we have got to address this historic shortfall.
It is a historic shortfall. You mentioned the number, $522 million, and yet you have refused to call it a crisis, even though that represents almost 50% of the discretionary spending that the city has, and not even discretionary if you talk about the set-asides, then it's even more than 50%. Isn't this a crisis, I mean, frankly?
And you recall last year I didn't use the word crisis for good reason, that I didn't feel it was, and I think one member of the county board said I lived in a parallel universe. But I think we proved that assertion wrong when we worked through the process and we were able to balance the budget without devastating impact in direct services. In fact, there were enhancements in services in some cases, tough choices nonetheless, and that was a significant shortfall. The reason I won't use the word crisis yet, and I underscore yet, in contrast to last year when I never intended to use it, is because a crisis assumes an inability to act, an inability to solve a problem. In the absence of those options, I will reserve the right to subscribe the word crisis to the situation. But there is no doubt this is the most challenging of the 14, 15 years I've been in local government. And it's exacerbated by the uncertainty at the state. And the fact that we are presenting a budget problem tonight that assumes only $40 million of state cuts, which is a remarkable assumption. It's twice as much as the state cuts last year that we couldn't finance against. But put it in perspective, it flies in the face of the budget that the governor just presented, which actually adopts over $200 million of local cuts. We simply aren't willing to accept that paradigm. If we have $200 million of cuts to the city's budget, we are beyond a crisis. We're in a position of almost being insolvent, and that is not a hyperbolic statement. That's why we can't accept that frame, but we do believe that the cuts will certainly be in that $40+ million range.
When you talk about the city can't accept that, how can you not accept it? What choice really does the city have?
Well, the choice is not to backfill the state cuts, and the choice is simply not to fund those cuts. Let me give you some examples of what the governor's proposed. The governor has a very curious budget. If I ever did this, I simply, you guys would laugh me out. You would run editorials and headlines calling for my removal or suggesting I've completely provided a vacuous analysis of the situation and not taken seriously the enormity of the task at hand. He assumes $6.9 billion in the next fiscal year of federal bailout money, which is a remarkable assumption. It would be analogous to me submitting a balanced budget and assuming a couple $100 million will come from the state. No one would take that particularly seriously. The reason that it's being taken seriously is the problem at the state is so large, they don't necessarily know what the alternative is either. If he doesn't receive that $6.9 billion, and by the way, the only evidence right now with the $3.8 trillion budget that the president submitted is that we'll receive about $1.5 billion of the $6.9. Now, there may be additional support, but right now it's only $1.5 billion. If the $6.9 billion contingency is not materialized, then it calls for eliminating welfare in the state of California. We'd be the only state in an industrialized nation in the world that doesn't have any safety net for indigents. It calls for the complete elimination of in-home support services for seniors so they allow to live in dignity and live in place and have the support therein that comes from this program. And third, it calls for the elimination of universal health care 0 to 18. Let's not talk about expanding it to everybody else. It calls for the state abandoning its commitment. That's pretty remarkable and extraordinarily draconian. And when you add those up and other cuts that he proposes, we're in that $200 million north range. I can't imagine that happening, nor should you at this moment. But there clearly has to be something dramatic that takes shape in the next few months, because we can't submit a balanced budget without having a little bit more certainty whether or not we need to be at $40 million or $200 million.
But when you talk about the city not backfilling the state programs, historically, at least in the past decade or so, maybe further back, the city has done that because they don't want to see in-home support services cut or health care cut or food programs or anything.
Schools, especially last year.
So how do you say this year is going to be different? You're going to be under a tremendous amount of pressure as the mayor, not only from the Board of Supervisors, but from the constituents to backfill those programs.
We don't have the money. I mean, it's that simple. The enormity is such that last year we were able to do that substantially, and here's why: because we were the beneficiary of a huge amount of federal stimulus. We had the anniversary of the federal stimulus program. We talked about net new jobs, and in San Francisco we can identify specifically just shy of 3,000 net new jobs. And that assumed, by the way, of the $1 billion the city overall has received, we've only spent down about 85 to 89 million. That's created those 3,000 net new jobs. What we did not include were all the jobs saved. And we did an analysis. There's one program through the federal a stimulus called FMAT. It deals with Medicaid dollars, Medi-Cal ultimately manifested here in California. It provided resources to the city where we saved just in that one contribution over 620 jobs, just in that one contribution last year. And it basically preserved that safety net and services. This year, the FMAT, we anticipate will only be about 22 million versus the north of 69, 70 million that it was last year. Again, because we drew down so much of the federal stimulus and it will fall off a cliff this year. That's why it's unrealistic to assume that the city can position itself in a way to backfill all these cuts. We simply can't. We have in the past been able to do that substantially, not exclusively, but it will be very difficult this year.
A lot of the questions that we got from people who wanted to give their input into the budget process had to do with specific programs. Rachel mentioned Muni. Boy, did we get questions about Muni. Yeah. Some people mentioned police. Some people, mentioned the fire department. Some people mentioned just all, you name it, individual programs. But I think the overriding question that people have when they talk about the budget, and you talk about the $6.6 billion that this one small city of just a little over 800,000 people spent, and they say to themselves, where does that money go? Yeah. Especially when you're talking about the wholesale elimination, possibly, of certain programs, substantial programs. I mean, can you put some kind of paint a picture of just how this whole process works?
One of the worst things that we allow to be promulgated in this city is this fundamental fact of misinformation that is pushed based, I believe, sincerely on agendas or ignorance, one of the two. And that is, well, we only have 849 or 839,000 people, yet we have a $6.6 billion budget. It's bigger than many states, and there's no city in the state of California on a per capita basis that spends even nearly as much. It's absolutely true, except for the foundational fact that people seem to forget. We're not just a city. We're a county. We're the only city county in the state of California. So when you compare Los Angeles City to the city and county budget, you have a similar sized budget, even though there's millions more residents in the city, because that's just a city budget there. When you include LA County's budget, all of a sudden it makes a little bit more sense.
But that's probably not a very good comparison. A more accurate comparison might be San Diego County, for example.
Fair. Then let's talk about that. We did an analysis last year in detail, and it shows that we disproportionately, compared to San Diego as one specific example, invest in health and human services unlike any other county in the state, notably San Diego County. So we have universal health care. We provide more money for in-home support services than any county in the state of California. We provide long-term aging care at Laguna Honda Hospital. We have an acute care facility at San Francisco General Hospital. Most counties are out of the hospital business, let alone long-term aging business. We have skilled nursing facility beds. These are things that most counties don't do, and it's something that we're proud of. It's something that we value. That being said, there's other areas where we don't spend as much as San Diego and other counties. But the bottom line is you can't compare our city and county budget to other city budgets unless you reconcile the fact that we have a budget that recognizes both. Let me just bring up one final thing. We manage the water system for the entire region. That flows through our budget.
And is making money.
And absolutely, but the bonds that the voters supported through this water system improvement program, $4.6 billion, as those bonds are expended, it goes into that 6.6. That's why it gets bigger. Our capital budgets are a big portion of that. We have a redevelopment agency, a port. We run an airport that's technically outside the city. It runs through our city's budget. So it appears much larger in scope and size because we're servicing not just the needs of 800,000+ residents, but larger number of people. Final point. That a lot of this money is categorical. It's federal dollars, again, disproportionate in health and human services, that you can't touch. That's why the budget is so big. And then the money that you can touch is limited, and then we limit it still because of all these set-asides. And if we have time, I'm sure there'll be some questions about set-asides.
Let's just jump in. Someone just responded to what you said. It says, this is C.J. Flowers. Philadelphia is also a city and county, and San Francisco spends 3 times per capita than Philadelphia. San Francisco wastes millions of dollars by employing too many people and paying them too much. It's not complicated.
Well, okay. We do have a lot of city employees, and we have less than when I started as mayor. And we see how popular that is when I do layoff notices. And we see how people are up in arms because they're all for having less employees as long as it doesn't impact their rec center, as long as it doesn't impact their beat officer walking the beat, as long as it doesn't close their fire station, as long as it doesn't impact their community nurse, as long as it doesn't impact a service directly. That's the challenge. I agree with that, and that's why I've reduced the size of our city workforce, and that's why we'll be compelled in this budget to probably do the same. And a way to mitigate that, though, and eliminate the number of layoffs, I have offered to our labor unions what I think is a very pro-labor alternative under the circumstances, and that is a part-time work week where we can save thousands of jobs and still provide employment and health care to employees as a mitigation factor to be able to address this economic downturn. I, with respect, know a lot about Philadelphia. I don't accept the paradigm of that framework. But again, if you want us to shut down the San Francisco General Hospital, we can do that. Let's get rid of Laguna Honda Hospital. Let's get rid of the entire health department, save about $1.5 billion. Let's start getting rid of, let's get out of the business of the water system improvement. I don't believe Philadelphia runs the water and sewer for the entire region, and I'm not sure the airport's part of that budget. We can get rid of the airport. We can get rid of the water system, our responsibility therein. You can start eliminating these things, and I'm not sure people are going to stand for that. So it may appear to be as simple as the questioner suggested, but I'm not convinced it is. But the spirit is not wrong. We are compelled to do more with less. We need to look at waste and redundancy. We have to disintermediate in terms of our employment base, and we have to streamline.
Let me ask you a little bit, when you talk about San Francisco values and that we have more than a lot of other places have, because of the continued budget problems, this isn't the first year San Francisco's had it. It's not going to be the last year San Francisco has it. Is it time for the mayor of San Francisco, for the residents, the voters, the board of supervisors, to rethink whether San Francisco can afford to be better, best, do more than other places do? Do we have to rethink who we are as a municipality?
Yeah, we do, but I still maintain that after this very difficult climate, we'll still be doing more than anybody else, and we should be. I mean, maybe I'm intuitive. I mean, I grew up in the city. I demand more of the city, and I think everyone else here does. This is an extraordinary city because we do extraordinary things. What other city does universal health care? What other city has universal after-school programs for middle school and elementary schools? What other city guaranteed there were no teachers laid off last year? What other city provides universal health care? What other city provides the most aggressive labor protections of any city in the United States of America? What city does more on supportive housing? I announced today 1,679 brand new supportive housing units and the subsidy to operate those units on an annual basis. These are things that I'm proud of as a San Franciscan, and I'm not going to ever back away from those values, but they do come at a cost. And we do have to analyze that cost in relationship to this shortfall, and we're going to have to make tough choices. But at the end of the day, that safety net is fairly firm, and that foundation is fairly strong, even though we're going to have to chip away a little bit at some of these programs.
This goes a little bit to what we've been talking about, well, more actually, where Deborah Rogers, who lives in District 6, wrote in yesterday, why can't the city's budget be reined in? It's out of control, blames it on supervisors' spending, and then says, it really disappoints me that as the only sensible gatekeeper of our city's budget spending, you're deserting us to pursue your career ambitions as lieutenant governor.
Well, I haven't made up my mind yet. I'm termed out. I'm the future ex-mayor, one way or another. I only have a certain period of time left on my term. I've committed almost 16 years of my life in a formal capacity to the city as president of the Parking and Traffic Commission, years on the Board of Supervisors. I survived, it's almost an exception now, an election for mayor, usually last 2 out of 3 or one-term mayors, and I've given it my heart and soul. So it's not as if I just walked away 10 years ago, let alone 5 years ago, let alone 2 years ago. But I am looking at that race, and I'll make a decision shortly. But I'm not going anywhere, even if I run for lieutenant governor, for another year. In the worst case, But I would be moving away 1 year before my term ends, and that's something that weighs very heavily on me.
Do you feel comfortable that you could be sufficiently focused on this job if you were running for Lieutenant Governor?
Yeah, I would not make the decision to run if I didn't feel that I could give it my all for the next year and navigate through this very difficult time. And that weighs in my decision making.
Okay. I, a couple of days ago, just thought, oh, I'll go through the sfgov.org website and take a look at some of the city departments.
She had a slow day.
Agencies.
Clearly.
Slow day. Yeah, this is what I found. I found 10 pages
Good.
in just your directory of different agencies, committees, task forces, departments, you name it. And, you know, I'm just going to challenge you to tell me that all 10 pages of these are essential to San Francisco city government, and that somehow our government will fall apart if we don't have a backstreets business advisory board.
Yeah.
If we don't have just a biosciences task force, a bicycle advisory committee, a ballot simplification committee, an asthma task force. I mean, I could go on and on and on, and I know that many of these task forces and advisory committees are near and dear to advocates.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I presume that all, if not most of them, cost the city at least a little change here and there.
No, not necessarily. The mayor's biotech advisory committee has done extraordinary work. It's the reason we have the Stem Cell Institute in San Francisco. It's the reason we created a framework to create a tax incentive that's taken 2 biotech companies
now,
when I
Willie Brown
started
says that
to over
he's the
60
reason why we have
biotech companies.
a stem cell institute
Okay,
in San Francisco.
okay, fair enough. Willie Brown is then. I mean, who cares about who gets the credit? But this advisory body was the one with me in Fresno when we made the case and we organized a framework to raise millions of dollars to get the institute in San Francisco. The asthma task force has done extraordinary work. People are wheezing and sneezing in public housing units, and we have a focused policy, and it's helped guide and aided us in that respect. The ballot simplification, I can't believe anyone would argue against simplifying ballot language, which is manipulated for political purposes, and allow it in layman's terms. Look, I'm not arguing for every single one of these. That's why I've eliminated 5 departments, consolidated the back office functions of dozens of more. And that's why in my budget I'll include the consolidations of more departments. Again, no mayor has done more to consolidate these departments than I have. That being said, some of these advisory committees are not cost drivers in terms of the budget deficit, and I wanted people to leave with the impression that's the case. But there are, I would argue, still too many city departments, and we could consolidate some more, and you'll see that in my budget.
Mayor, let me jump forward with a big issue that's kind of festering now with the budget, and that's Muni. It's this Friday that the Municipal Transportation Agency Board is going to be considering mid-year budget cuts and fee hikes to try to stop this $17 million budget deficit going through. So here's a question that came in from Twitter for you, Mayor Newsom. Why is the city slashing Muni's budget and services, et cetera?
Yeah, well, it's simple. $179.1 million. $179.1 million is what the state of California has taken from this system in the last 3 years, and they propose to take another $78 million this year. We would be running a surplus within the margin of error had we not had those state cuts. It's as simple as that. As simple as that. There's the answer. Now, that's reality. So how do you deal with the reality? I don't get to deal in the abstract. I can fight, and as every year I go up to Sacramento, we have lobbyists, we make a strong case, don't take our money. I've worked with other Big Ten mayors, we've written letters, we've threatened ballot initiatives, all of that. We're doing all of that this year again. But the fact is they've done what they've done. So now we're forced with this big gap. People want more service. They have more service since the 3rd Street Light Rail. They want not only more service, they don't necessarily want to pay anymore. Even though we have increased the fares, they're still among the lowest of big cities in the country, but people have had about enough. They certainly have had enough of parking ticket increases, certainly had enough of fees and fines, and they're done with it. Now we're talking about doing that and cutting service, and they're angry, and they should be angry. I get it. I'm with them. That's why I asked the labor unions to step up. Asked TWU, representing the bus operators, spent 4 days negotiating, partially in this room and right above us, in the room upstairs, to get those concessions. They rejected them. That could have avoided senior, disabled, and youth fare increases. It could have mitigated the service cuts. They have an opportunity to do the right thing again. We'll see what they do. If they don't, I assure you, there will be a ballot initiative that the public, I believe, will overwhelmingly support because we're all in this together. We'll do our part, the public will do their part, but labor needs to do their part. And labor in the past has done their part. They need to do it again because the reality of the situation calls for it.
Right. You talk to some of the Muni operators and they say, look, we already have done it. We've been in a wage freeze for a while. Service cuts really do affect us, they're saying,
They're right.
because when there are service cuts, there are less buses on the street, less chances for overtime. They're saying that the argument is being framed against them and not necessarily fairly.
I have extraordinary admiration for our Muni operators. I don't know of a more abusive job outside perhaps this one that interacts more directly with the public. And I'm extraordinarily sympathetic to that. And I've stood up. You guys have been around a long time. When I was a member of the Board of Supervisors, called for hearings every year about the way some members of the public treat parking control officers that are just doing their jobs, and the racial epithets, and people being spat upon. Remember years ago someone was shot with a pellet gun. They've shown me what members of the public, these are judges, lawyers, and professionals, will write on the back of tickets. This is what these bus drivers and some of our PCOs get every single day. That being said, we ask them in this time of crisis, in this time of extraordinary challenge, to help us, because here's why. They're due a raise, a wage increase. Is it the right time to take a wage increase when we have to pay for that by increasing the cost for disabled and seniors and cutting service even more? I don't think so, and I think they're going to step up. I don't know when, but I think they'll do the right thing. And we've been blessed because labor in this town always does the right thing at the end of the day. And that's why I want to caution people just saying, hey, we'll go after city employees, screw them, lay people off, throw them out. These are human beings. These are people with sons and daughters, aunts and uncles, caretakers. These are folks that are working hard, and they deserve dignity and respect as well. At the same time, we have to meet our obligations and balance our budgets, tighten our belts. And that's why, again, the spirit of doing more with less is a spirit that I accept.
And let me just, sorry, real quickly on Muni, and then we'll get away from that. But we have so many questions about Muni and comments about Muni from the folks who logged in on this. They're talking about the proposed 10% service cuts just going mid-year. It would be among the deepest, if not the deepest, that Muni's ever had.
Yeah.
One of the questions is, how can this be a transit-first city if you're going to support or not block having such deep service cuts?
Well, I can block it, but then I've got a math problem. I could say, no, it's the greatest job in the world. I miss my days at the Board of Supervisors. No. Oh, terrible. Sit there, I can be at rallies, call for resolute. No. That's not my job. I get to be the most unpopular person in San Francisco because I happen to be mayor, and I have to say no, especially in this economic climate. If I, however, move forward and not accept some of these proposals, then how do I balance a budget? And people say, well, here's how. You just increase the cost of parking in San Francisco. To which I remind them that we've done that in the last 4 or 5 years. You've got to remember what we've done the last few years. Used to be able to, I remember in the old days, you used to have a dime, you'd get 2 hours, let alone a quarter. Now you get 10 minutes with a quarter. What are parking tickets costing, folks? And middle-class, hardworking folks get a parking ticket. It's a backbreaker. These are real people. So you have to balance that reality that some people cannot walk 3 blocks up a hill with bags of groceries with 2 little kids, and they may need a car, with the need to, yes, have a strong transit-first policy, which I've always advocated. Look, the author of Proposition E that created the Metropolitan Transportation Authority is sitting right here as a supervisor. And I supported efforts with Prop A a few years ago to enhance the budget at Muni and to stabilize it. I want to see a strong transit-first framework. It's the only way you can organize and operate an effective world-class city. But we have a big problem because of these state cuts. I do not want to see these service impacts as acute as 10%, and that's why labor can help us. They're not the only people we're asking to participate, but they're one of the most important at the moment.
This afternoon, just shortly before this podcast began. In fact, there was a Board of Supervisors committee committee meeting in which one of your proposals to help solve this budget crisis, or at least stimulate the economy, was tabled. Another one was continued, both dealing with tax breaks for business. And I thought it was fascinating for this reason, because the unions were out in force saying this is bad for us, that you're stimulating the economy, maybe you're creating some jobs in the private sector, but the city then is going to have less revenue, and as a result, we're going to get laid off.
Yeah.
Now, as the mayor, aren't you really kind of the boss of city workers? Don't you have an obligation to look out for them first?
No.
Or how do you view this?
I have an obligation to look out for the people of the city and county of San Francisco. They're my boss. And I think it would be very healthy for San Francisco to ask City Hall to shut down for a month or two and get back out in the streets and sidewalks and talk to real people again. Who do we represent? I will fight for working families and the working poor, but I want to keep health clinics open. I want to make sure that we're providing quality services. And you can't do that unless you create jobs. But not all jobs are government jobs. In fact, the vast majority of jobs are private sector jobs. Now, if you're pro-job and anti-business, you tell me how that works. I don't know how that works. I am pro-job and pro-small business and medium-sized and big business to the extent they treat their workers with respect and create wealth and opportunity and generate income. And I believe we need to stimulate our private sector economy. I'm a small business person. I've had the privilege of creating over 1,400 jobs. I know a thing or two about this. And right now, we've asked our small businesses to pay the highest minimum wage in the state of California, second highest in America. We've asked them to pay for paid sick leave. We've asked them to pay for health care. All, by the way, initiatives I supported. And I want to give a little relief in this very difficult economic climate. And that relief, by the way, is being parroted by the President of the United States himself, who believes it's at the right time to provide for tax incentives. Because we're the only city in the state that has a burden for creating jobs. It's called a payroll tax. Every other county and every other city in the state doesn't charge you for creating a job. In San Francisco, we do, and I'd like to think that we could provide a relief, especially to those providing health care, where no other city in America requires that responsibility, to say we value that and we respect that. Here's a token return on the investment you're making in your people and benefiting and the benefit you're providing the city. But I get the fact that I'm outgunned here. The Board of Supervisors has a different point of view, and this is a good debate. I'm not naive, and I think it's an important one. At the same time, we have to protect city revenue, and the way you do that, create jobs, which creates revenue, which provides for city services and benefits city employees who have been treated respectfully quite well by any comparative analysis in terms of their wages and certainly their benefits. And I have participated in that, and some would argue I've been too generous. I would argue that we've done the right thing under the circumstances. And I'm not going to apologize for the way we treated our employees, because I think we've treated them well. But now we're asking them to step up and help us even more, and I know how difficult that is.
There's a perception out there that I think was reflected in a number of the questions that we got, and this is one of them. Why aren't cutbacks being made in management positions in city government? So there's at least the perception that the people on top are staying and the lowest level workers are going. Is that the case or not?
It's not the case. I mean, we have an organization that represents managers called MEA. It's like SCIU represents certain employees, the laborers, 261 represents others, etc. One is MEA. They gave back last year. They contributed. The managers contributed to the budget deficit. I contributed to the budget deficit. My staff contributed to the budget deficit. There were substantial management layoffs. But you have to have department heads if you're going to have a department. You've got to have someone managing the department. You need managers. You need people accountable for organizing, functioning, and governing. And I know that some people want to take a pound of flesh there so that it's easier to make the argument that the rest of us have to participate. But we have. And I think I was just meeting with labor. I think there's nothing worse than labor unions attacking other labor unions. And I think it's an unfortunate paradigm that we've got one representative body attacking another represented body. And I think now it's in all of our interest to work together and be more collaborative.
There seems to be a lot of the questions that we got do have to do with the city employees unions. This one's from Carla from Facebook. when are we going to seriously trim entitlements in San Francisco government?
Well,
and a lot of questions about pensions.
Yeah,
and about health,
right.
and about the health system.
Yeah.
And I think that's coming from a lot of people now, where there was a generosity before, but I think a lot of people who live in San Francisco are saying, well, I got my health care cut at work, I got my benefits cut at work, my paycheck is smaller than it was a year ago, if I'm lucky enough to have a job. How come the same isn't necessarily happening in city government?
Well, it's ironic because some would argue it's exactly the opposite, that it's all that's being talked about in city government. I told our public employees that I believe in a part-time work week in order to scale back the costs and to provide a framework where the taxpayers will benefit and reduce the size of the deficit by about $50 million. I authored with Supervisor Sean Ellsburn and negotiated and organized a framework with the supervisor for pension reform. I was the author, co-author with Supervisor Ellsburn a number of years ago on Prop B, working with labor to address our unfunded health care liability. And this city stepped up and stepped in. Not many other cities in the United States have dealt with that prospectively. Now we have to address the benefit and pension side, and we have a proposal in front of the Board of Supervisors that we've authored to address that concern and that question. We're taking this very seriously, and I think it's one of the reasons that this city continues to outperform in terms of its bond rating, in spite of today's news that Fitch rating showed us at a negative outlook, but they didn't downgrade us. Contrast that to other cities that haven't taken this as seriously, like Los Angeles, where they were downgraded. So we are stepping up to the task, and we're asking everyone to participate. And mark my words, from managers to frontline employees to the benefits, we are looking at all of that, and we're trying to find a co-equal strategy of sorts to address this unprecedented.
So, Mayor Newsom, how does this work? You have your ideas, you've thrown them out there, you've been meeting a little bit with labor, it's probably going to step up as you're going into the budget cycles, really gearing up. What are the steps that have to be taken? Does labor have to agree to this? Does the Board of Supervisors have to agree to it? Does it have to go to the voters? How do you go from idea to carrying it out?
All of the above. Look, if TWU, for example, back to the Muni question, do not agree to a $14.9 million contribution to offset the deficit at Muni and to mitigate the service cuts and remove the senior youth and disabled passes, they have a right to do that. They can reject it. But the public also has the right to respond by going to the ballot, and I anticipate that that will happen if indeed they reject it. That being said, that's one example. We've offered that pension reform. The Board of Supervisors can support placing that on the ballot and give the public the chance to decide, or they cannot allow the public that right, and then there'll most likely be a signature drive and an initiative that will be placed on the ballot. All the other management agreements in the traditional sense, do you get a 1% wage increase, no increase, et cetera, goes through a process where a memorandum of understanding is negotiated by the mayor and the Human Resource Department, and then goes to the Board of Supervisors for ratification. If they reject it, we have a process to deal with that. In most cases, they'll ratify the contracts that are being negotiated without having to go to the voters and without having to ballot.
And your budget's due to the Board of Supervisors June 1st. It's now almost March 1st. Do you have time to actually shake out all those agreements that you're hoping to get?
Yeah, we have only about 15 open contracts. The rest of the contracts are closed, and we've been meeting with labor to talk about this option, this proposal of a part-time work week, 37 and a half hours, that could mitigate layoffs. If they reject that or believe that there's a better alternative and they prefer layoffs, I'll be open to that as long as it doesn't have draconian direct service cuts to the taxpayers and to people that are vulnerable to those cuts in terms of the impact. And if there's another proposal, just across the board wage concessions, by the way, what they did in Oakland last year, 10%, or what they are offering the mayor of San Jose, 10 to 15%, then I'm open to those proposals as well. But I think the best labor proposal out there is the one we've offered, again, that will protect jobs, keep people employed, provide for health benefits, but reduce the cost of government in a way that can mitigate and offset these direct service cuts.
It seems that one of the problems that the public has is that they don't get a sense that at this point at least there is a plan to balance the budget, that you've got this thing over here and this thing over here and this thing over here, but realistically they're not all going to come together. And at the end of the day, something else much more dramatic and draconian is going to happen. So what exactly is your plan at the moment?
Well, here's the good news, is city has among the highest bond ratings of any big city in the state. The city has balanced its budgets in the past effectively. We have a management system that's quite effective from controller's office on down. We have a rainy day reserve, which we're going to draw down from again. We have a framework going forward of 2-year budgets. We have a strategic planning element. We have performance reviews that are required. We have a pay-as-you-go strategy that was supported by the voters. We have a framework where we're doing more audits than any time in city's history. We're doing less in terms of sole source contracting, and we're asking everyone to participate. We're streamlining government and governance. We've advanced civil service reforms. We're doing much better than I think the average person believes,
but
because they don't read that.
What does that actually mean?
But here's what it means. Yeah, and this is exactly, you're absolutely right to ask that. And here's what that means. We have that as a foundation to, yet again, address our challenges moving forward. And we'll do that. We proved ourselves in the last few years that we can preserve services and in some cases enhance them, even with big budget deficits. I can't promise the enhancements this year, but I can promise we're going to do everything in our power to mitigate those direct service cuts. Let me be now more precise. Recreation and Park, a very interesting budget proposal they're offering me that has layoffs, has changes and cuts, but may actually provide in some cases more service. That's a way of being creative and doing more with less. Not the same services. People have to conduct themselves in terms of the way they interact with the system differently, but there are actual opportunities for enhancements. I'm not suggesting it's that easy, and by the way, those proposals weren't easy, but there's ways of doing things differently, but we have to have the courage to change, and people fear change. And what happens, dare I say, with respect to both of you and others, every time you make a change, it's a headline grabber, and it's put as a cut. And you have the people that are for it and the people are against it, and people are left going, boy, things are dysfunctional down there. And it doesn't necessarily always give the total picture. Here's what I've challenged you and others. I challenge. Look at all of the headlines that have been written in the last 4 or 5 years about all these draconian cuts and how devastating they would be. That went forward. It'd be interesting to do an analysis of, were they as draconian as the opponents claimed? Has the system truly been destroyed, as some had suggested? Or were we able to move forward and people to conduct themselves differently in a way where we're actually still on the leading and cutting edge? I think it'd be an interesting exercise.
Let's jump into the Rec and Park budget for a moment, because that got unanimous approval at the Recreation and Park Commission last week, and it is something that was kind of blowing up the system when it comes to how they're dealing with labor. They brought them in. It was interesting to see. Now there's some grumbling going on, but on the whole, labor was saying we're going to sign on to it.
Right.
In short, the easy way to say it, people had to, everyone's going to get a pink slip, even though they aren't, and they have to reapply for a new job.
Yeah.
How is that allowed to happen in San Francisco without a huge uprising? What happened there that should or couldn't happen in the rest of the city government?
Well, what happened there is we had extraordinary cooperation with SEIU and our management team, and they worked together in good faith and worked to compromise. And that was a model. It was an extraordinary effort. Hardly perfect. Again, still a lot of tough choices and changes. But it was saying, hey, we accept reality and we're going to step up by working together. That's the spirit of that change that I hope we can see with all the other changes. But I recognize the magnitude of the changes and the timing of those changes are such that it may be difficult, because those took dozens and dozens of hours just to negotiate the finer points around just how we deal with rec centers, let alone how we deal with the totality of the governance of the city.
Well, you know, there was actually 2 issues. There was the one that Rachel talked about, which is just the total change in how labor was going to do its business. But at the end of the day, what seemed more significant to me from the public's point of view is whether the Recreation and Park Department was basically turned into, for all practical purposes, no longer a public institution, because virtually everything except the grass you walk on, and in some cases even the grass you walk on, you have to pay to use.
Yeah.
And that's at least, that's not my notion of what a, quote, public park is.
Because you're used to the way things have been done, and the world has changed dramatically.
So is there no longer such things as a free public park or recreation facility?
There absolutely is. And by the way, 167 of them have been completely revitalized with public funds, and we have 20-plus new projects underway now. We had the best scores in terms of public surveys in our recreation park system in our history, and I think we're making real progress. It's a passion of mine, recreation and park. That being said, the recreation side has to change. We can no longer afford the status quo. And candidly, I don't think anyone wants the status quo. It's pretty paltry what's existed for years and years. For some rec centers, there's barely anyone there, and if they're there, they're providing services the community doesn't necessarily want. What we're going to do now is work with nonprofits, community-based organizations that disproportionately are publicly funded, and have them come in and work with the community and build a framework of services that work for the unique needs of that diverse community and provide something, candidly, that doesn't exist in a more robust manner. I think that's a creative way of working through the problem. Don't get me wrong. You're right. To get a barbecue or to have a barbecue, we now have to reserve that, and something you have to pay. And that's the reality of what's happened in terms of the macroeconomics during the Bush years, cutting taxes, cutting federal support for government, and that having a trickle-down effect on municipalities, again, that cannot borrow and cannot tax their way out, that have to make tough decisions to balance their budgets.
Is there any guarantee at all, though, that if the parks are, there's more partnerships with nonprofits or private donors come in and help sponsor parks, that it's still going to be, as Barbara said, a public park, that these folks who have the funding, the money to do something about it aren't going to get special preference?
Yeah.
Or because they step up, are they going to get special preference?
No, they shouldn't. I mean, first and foremost, we always must maintain that framework and that paradigm of public. But you have to look at public-private partnerships and public-public partnerships. We have a lot of agencies, other city agencies, other agencies that don't necessarily operate through the city's annual appropriation that can also partner with us in a way that is consistent with our values. Look, we haven't privatized by putting the Gap or Cisco or Oracle's name on every rec center, and they come in first and then they'll allow the public at $50 an hour to use their services. But I know the fear is out there, and I know some services are coming at cost. And I know some nonprofits that are in there are providing things that used to be provided in the past at no cost whatsoever, yoga services or Pilates or stretch classes or senior nutrition programs that are now being considered as activation opportunities in these rec centers. Times have changed, and we've got to move with those changes. Good example is New York, right? Central Park. They have a strong public-private partnership. It hasn't put a gate necessarily on Central Park. I think it's enhanced Central Park. Some are arguing for a similar framework here at Golden Gate Park. Again, you have to deal with reality, and you have to look at those alternatives as potential.
Let's talk about the issue of change, though, in Rec and Park. One of the big fights over there is about the Stowe Lake and the concession stand. There are a lot of people who have grown up using Stowe Lake. They use the rowboats, they feed the ducks, they get their cherry Slurpee and their pink popcorn, and whether that's not good for, even if it's not good for them, they don't want that to change. They did it as kids, they want their kids and grandkids to do it.
And I miss Doggy Diner.
You still have a Doggy Diner?
I know, I was being literal, not figurative. Yeah, I mean, I jog up there 3 days a week, and I can tell you we need to improve things at Stowe Lake. The quality of the water, the quality of the conditions and the infrastructure, and dare I say, with respect, the quality of the concession. It's just not up to par. Good people managing it, good people operating, limited resources. I hope they can participate in some of the support and change. They can still sell pink popcorn. I also think they should sell some apples and oranges and some other healthy alternatives. But we have to do things differently, and we have to make investments. And I think Stowe Lake's actually one of the areas where we'd like to make some investments.
Well, there's actually, in this proposal, there's a lot of new concessions, open markets, just all different kinds of things that would be coming to what has been public park land for the city to make some money off of it and for some entrepreneurs to make money off of it as well. Is that something that is going to benefit the public?
Oh, yeah. It generates revenue. It offsets cuts to gardeners. I think it's a rather innovative idea. I think it's an extraordinarily good idea. Again, all of these questions are predicated on this point, reality. We have unprecedented shortfalls. I'd love the world where none of us got taxed and everything was free. That's an extraordinary world. We don't live in.
That
I know.
For all of us?
I mean, you listen to some folks, on the other side of the aisle, they seem to still think that's possible. To the extent they can show me the way to get there, I want to go there first. So back to your questions. I don't want to privatize anything. I don't want to change some of the things we're doing any more than anyone else. But that's not a path that gets us to where we legally must go. It's a path to bankruptcy and insolvency, but not a path for progress.
So what do you say to property owners, people who live here and pay sales tax, or anyone who pays taxes for anything in San Francisco, and you're charging them for their burglar alarm, you're charging them for...
It happened to me, that's why I laughed. I didn't like that one.
Yeah, you don't like that one. I didn't. You know, you're charging them for all these recreation facilities. You're charging them for, it seems like, everything. And at the end of the day, they say, okay, so if you're charging me for everything, where's that money that I pay in taxes going?
Yeah, that's why...
What's the answer to that question?
Well, the answer is going to provide for our seniors. It's going to provide for the dignity that they will have at Laguna Honda Hospital and the support they're going to have through robust adult daycare services. It's going into making sure that if your son or daughter or friend or family member, God forbid you, have a serious emergency, that you're going to get the best quality care at San Francisco General Hospital. It's going into providing opportunities to deal with the disparity in public education for African Americans and Latinos by saying the most important investment we can make is preschool, and in making that investment, it's going into after-school programs, it's going into community policing, it's going into revitalizing those parks and rec centers, it's going into revitalizing our library system, it's going into upgrade our water and sewer system. I get it. The real point is there an appetite to be taxed anymore? When you're being feed to death, and I get that more than any other complaint, all these fees and fines, I don't know that there's an appetite to go forward with any big general tax increases. And therein lies the challenge. That means, again, we have to balance a budget without the expectation the voters want to increase their sales tax or create a utility users tax for residences or provide some other tax on top of the already high taxes we pay.
Well, let's talk about the taxes, because the Board of Supervisors is certainly talking about wanting to put taxes on the November ballot, saying, look, we've got a revenue problem in San Francisco. We've got to try to increase the revenue that we have so we don't keep facing budget deficit after budget deficit. Are there any tax hikes out there that you would consider supporting at this point?
Well, not some that hurt job growth. I mean, again, I want to incentivize job creation.
So any tax hikes that you would support?
I am open to creative ideas, but right now I haven't found a tax that has been particularly embraced by the majority of folks I've come into contact with. I just haven't found that one. Again, we have a baseline of very high taxes in this city. We come with that baseline. So to start, I mean, some people want to create an income tax in the city. I think that would be a major mistake. Some want to increase the hotel tax. I think, wait a second, that's the driver in terms of economic benefit to our arts and cultural facilities and to the city's general fund. And we have possibility of real labor unrest this year. Is it the best time, when tourism is our #1 economic generator, to increase that hotel tax? People want to say, well, let's do a sales tax. To which I say, well, that's a regressive tax that hurts poor people more, and we're already near 10%. Do you want to go over 10%? You want to pay more for utility use? Interesting, but who's going to pay? These are tough questions, and I don't have the quick answer, but I have looked at some of these proposals, and I have processed those proposals with folks I come into contact, and I'm not getting a lot of enthusiasm for those tax measures.
There's also talk about perhaps a parcel tax for park and recreation, parcel tax or property tax for the schools, taxes perhaps even for transportation. And some of your commissioners are talking about those as well as something to perhaps push forward. Is that something that you're giving consideration to?
I've been meeting with the school district. Education is the foundation for everything else. It's the solution to every conceivable problem. That's an overstatement, but only marginally. And we've been very supportive of the framework of engaging, and we have, with the school district around the possibility of a parcel tax to help our public schools, which just had 900 layoff notices and have a $113 million budget shortfall this year because of the state of California. And our rainy day reserve in the past has helped offset those cuts, but this year all we can offer them is roughly $6 million, which is not even close to what they need to deal with all of those notices and being able to get them rescinded. So I am open to that. I am not ideologically opposed to tax increases. Heck, I promoted them in 2004. I did TV commercials. But the public rejected them then. Imagine in this environment where people are scared about the ability to pay their rent, let alone pay their child's college tuition or their own, where they're facing fee and fine increases across the board and feeling the pressure of uncertainty around the macroeconomic situation, their own health care and the like. I just don't think there's a great appetite. And so, I have no choice but deal with reality. And I will offer this to those that say he's not dealing with the reality, that we love taxes and I'm ready to pay more. We can't even impose a tax increase, or the voters can't impose it on themselves until November. I have to submit a balanced budget by May 1st and June 1st. So it won't even solve this year's fiscal problem. And that's something that should caution everyone to not overstate what new revenue measures can do.
Do you think you could get labor perhaps to buy in more to your proposals for cost-cutting proposals if you had a written or verbal guarantee that you would support and vigorously campaign for a tax measure on the November ballot, even if it didn't pass, but if they had your commitment that you'd support that?
Again, it's a fool's errand to do something that you know is going to fail, because then you let people down and you mislead them. And I don't think it's right to mislead people. They have a false expectation. And I know some people politically want cover to do that, but I'm not into political cover. I'm dealing with hardcore reality. It's a tough job. It's all step up. That's what leadership's about. We're all adults. We got to start acting like it. Start telling people the truth. And there's a lot of abdication. People want to spend money they don't have, and they tell people that they don't want to make any cuts, and that's gratuitous because it doesn't deal with the reality of the situation in hand. And they say we're going to solve all your problems by putting a tax measure on, and that misleads people because it doesn't equate any rationale that A, it will solve this year's problem because the taxes can't even be collected even if the voters approve it. You don't just accept if you have a big tax increase, all the money's going to come the day after the election. It's imposed over the course of months, if not years. And that, again, doesn't address today's problem. So I don't mean to be so argumentative and aggressive on it, but I want people to tell people the truth and not mislead folks. But I'm not opposed to new revenue. That's why I've offered creative ideas like monetizing taxi cab medallions, which places like New York have done very successfully. Tens of millions of dollars could be generated to offset cuts and fare increases at Muni. I've offered alternatives on condo conversion fees, so we can create opportunities for people to become homeowners and provide a framework where that money that's generated can go in to offset the general fund contribution to affordable housing. These are proposals that hasn't been met necessarily very positively here, but there's ways of finding revenue without taxing people and without burdening the poor by coming up with regressive proposals like sales tax increases. So again, I'm not opposed, but I want to deal in a reality-based process and paradigm.
Rachel and I have been talking a lot about really what is the purpose of city government and what's a city supposed to do? What are the basic services that you provide given the amount of money that a city might have? Can you talk about that just in the context of, okay, we've got a $522 million shortfall. We can't pay for everything. We know we believe in education. We believe in public safety. We believe in helping people who can't help themselves. But at what point does it end and does it become superfluous because you're just out of money?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a profound question you've asked. What's the role of government? What's the purpose of government? And the subtext of that is nuanced in the context of this debate around what we preserve then and what we protect and what we fight for in this budget. Yeah, Benjamin Zandier said something wonderful. He's the former conductor of the Boston Philharmonic, and he talked about what his role was as the conductor. He said he was the relentless architect of human possibility. I say that in the context of what, from my perspective, government should be at its best, is create conditions and create a framework of possibility where people can live their lives out loud and people have the capacity to live their lives fully and expressively as a framework to answer your question. Now, what does that mean? Some are able to do it much easier than others. Some struggle and the like. You have to create a framework of safety as a framework of that. Public safety then becomes fundamental. Of health, you can't get educated if you're wheezing and sneezing and have asthma, back to your asthma task force thing. And so we have to provide a paradigm for basic public health. That safety net needs to be firmly established. That's where, from my perspective, you have to lay a strong foundation. And you can't pierce that foundation of safety and fundamental values that allow people that are slipping through the cracks to have that care for those most vulnerable. And then you build on that. you know, there's a lot of wonderful things we do that are could-haves, but not necessarily should-haves. And those are the things that need to be evaluated in this climate. And those are the things we are evaluating. It's what my departments are all evaluating.
Let's take a look. One of the things that you've wanted to do is to limit traffic on Market Street.
Yes.
One of the ways that that's being done is to have forced right-hand turn lanes at 2 intersections. I believe it's 10th and 6th now.
Yeah, we've changed it.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and to do that, you don't just have signs up. You have
PCOs.
parking control officers, usually 2 of them, standing there for a good chunk of the day,
Yeah.
showing cars to turn right.
Yeah, that can't continue for very long.
I mean, that's money there. And
Yeah,
those
that's
are
right.
parking control officers that aren't writing
Yeah.
tickets or trying to undo traffic jams
Yeah.
somewhere. Is that at times like that, when you have a philosophical goal of wanting to limit traffic and then you have the reality of budget cuts, is that...
Well, I don't want to just
It's
limit...
not a lot. You're talking, it's not a ton of money, but it is some
No.
money, and that adds up.
Well, I'm not going to accept the status quo of mid-market. And anyone that believes mid-market is where it should be, and you know everyone loves going down. I mean, I don't know many people say, "Boy, I really love commuting down Market Street." So it's not necessarily the most desirous commute to begin with, let alone most desirous place to walk or even drive by. Central Market, 6th, 7th, 5th Street, and the like. So I want to change that. And I think a lot of members of the Board of Supervisors, to their credit, want to change that. So it means you have to experiment. You've got to try different things. One of them is dealing with traffic flow. We want to get Muni to move more efficiently. And by the way, the on-time performance numbers have gone up since we've done that. We want to start activating the streets and sidewalks and doing outdoor cafes and providing outdoor seating, more music, dance, and theater out on the streets and sidewalks, the arts in the storefront, and taking old vacant storefronts and bringing them back to life. We have a new central market partnership that we're forming, old redevelopment plan, tax increment financing strategy, but with partnerships with all these city departments. And we have a process. It's a 6-month pilot, not just the parking and traffic side of it, but all of these other enhancements. So there's a narrative here. There's a beginning, middle, and end. And we're barely at the middle now. And you're going to see this process over the next few months. But you're right, we cannot sustain the costs of having PCOs there.
And I think that the point that Rachel is trying to make, if it is a point, is that in a perfect world, I mean, what you describe is wonderful. No, who could argue with what you've just described? But at the end of the day, is this the time? Can the city of San Francisco afford to be taking on new projects like that?
Let me just jump in and say this is what one of the people who are watching this program says. They say, pave the streets, maintain the parks, provide police and fire, run a public transit system. These are some of the basics that the government has to do.
Agreed.
$6.6 billion a year, where does it all go?
Yeah.
And the question is this the time
it goes
to do
to
it
paving
as well?
the streets, providing quality public transit, providing for parks and recreation. Exactly right. In fact, some of the biggest budget items
Right,
are
but then
in those
then there's
priorities.
the and and the and and the and and the and.
Well, we believe in universal health care. I believe in universal preschool. I want to support the public schools. I believe arts education is important. And I believe that I'm not the only one that believes that. I believe the person that wrote in probably believes that. I've quadrupled the investment in repaving the streets since I've been mayor. That person wrote in should be very proud of that. We've substantially improved the investment at Muni. It's close to $800 million. It's substantially improved over the last number of years. By the way, we had the highest on-time performance in our city's history last year. The bar is very low, and I hear everyone rolling their eyes.
Right. I mean, we have a question right here from someone who says, why can't we manage to fix our roads with the existing amount of money we have?
Yeah, we don't. Well, again, I've quadrupled it, and the state of California has substantially cut it. Back to the state. Look, we are not an island. I know we talk about the city being 47.5 square miles surrounded by reality, but we're not an island. We're directly impacted by state and federal cuts. What has the state cut? Gas tax money. They've cut road repair money. And we've creatively increased it in spite of those cuts. I think people should be very proud. Here's the problem. For 30 years, we've had deferred maintenance on our roads and sidewalks, where there hasn't been an investment. When I got here, let me give you a number. When I got here, the highest number that was provided on an annual basis to repave our streets was $12 million in general fund. Went over $49 million last year, and we came up with some creative financing this year. Again, when I say quadruple, I mean that literally. And the problem is you can't make up for 30 years of neglect in just a few years, but we are paving more streets than we've ever paved this year. I don't know that we can promise that in the future. We are providing higher level of quality service at Muni than we have in years, again, recognizing how low the bar is. We have revitalized 167 parks and neighborhood rec facilities. We're putting $7.2 million in to redo 19 new bathrooms starting next week. So people should know that is a fundamental
Okay,
problem.
but let's go to Muni.
And crime was among the lowest it's been
Let's
in
go
half
to
a
Muni
century.
again a little bit. Right now, they don't have enough parts on the shelves to fix the
correct.
buses, so buses are sitting in the yards and not
correct.
going out. Again, on Friday, the Muni Commission is going to be considering 10% cuts, so where you made these gains over the last year or two, which you're proud of, then it's going to start going backwards.
I don't want to
again.
sound like a broken record. We would not have any of these decisions to make had it not been for the state cutting $179.1 million in the last 3 years and offering a $78 million cut this year. We would have a surplus. We would have more parts on the shelves, we'd have more buses out there operating, and we continue our progress that we have made on-time performance and reducing accidents, which, by the way, factually has been the case, even though we've had these tragic high-profile accidents, which are unacceptable. So again, I agree. Look, here's what I propose as mayor. No cuts, rollback fees and fines, service enhancements. World-class parks, world-class rec facilities, the best Muni, the most beautiful paved parks with trees lined, with outdoor seating, cafes, with vibrant cultural institutions. Okay, how do you pay for it? Well, we don't want to increase taxes. We don't want those fines. I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but let me tell you, we have some of the best. I mean, I have visitors all the time say, you have one of the most amazing public transit systems in the world. I travel all over the world. People say, boy, you really have one of the most beautiful cities, the trees and the flowers you're putting up. And, you know, a lot of the streets, the new median strips that are being done on Divisadero, and out there in Portola and other places. They say, boy, these cultural institutions are remarkable. You increased hours of operation at your libraries, and how proud you must be to have the new Academy of Sciences and the MoMA and the expansion opportunities and the African Diaspora Museum and the Jewish Museum that's new and the De Young and the Stribing Arboretum. And, I mean, there's a lot of wonderful things we do, and we should start focusing as well on some of those. I know a budget is a downer in a down economy, but there's a lot that we're still doing that is a pride for America, and we are a model for America. And you know what? That's something to be very, very enthusiastic about and not to be shamed about.
You have to obviously deal with the Board of Supervisors to pass this budget, and I'm just thinking that there must be some times when you want to go over and wring their necks.
Figuratively, yeah. Well, I get frustrated. I was a member of the board, so I understand their role vis-a-vis the mayor. I've apologized to Mayor Brown for some of my conduct as a member of the board since I've been mayor. I don't think you ever will understand what it's like to be mayor until you're mayor. And I really didn't understand what the mayor did. I thought I did when I was a supervisor. I really didn't understand how important it was to have a mayor with a strong relationship with the Speaker of a House. And I mean, we got $92 million of federal money this year to clean up the shipyard. That may be one of the biggest news stories of the year. And, you know, we got a little note that, oh, nice, you got $92 million to deal with environmental justice in the Southeast sector. In this economic climate, we got more federal stimulus per capita than probably any other big city in America. There's a lot of good work that's being done, and a lot of creative ways to offset some of these cuts that we should all be proud of. I mean, how did our universal health care plan get born? It wasn't born because we had a resolution or an ordinance and we all sat together and had a press conference. It was because we got federal money. How did we get federal money? $71+ million that went through the state. It was because of these relationships, and we organized strategies to do that. So there's a lot of things that are going on that the board is very supportive of, and we work very collaboratively around. This will be a tough budget for them. We worked very closely together last year. I've been very appreciative in the past, and I joked with Supervisor Avalos, it probably hurts him with some of the ideological factions in the city that I say this, but he's a person of integrity. Don't always agree with him. That I can trust when he comes in my office and says, here's what I'm going to do. And that's how we were able to get a budget deal last year. And I'm glad he's there this year, even though I know he's going to have to say what he needs to say about the mayor's draconian cuts. And I'm prepared for that because I understand where that comes from, and I don't disagree with him. But we're going to work through this budget as we did last year by working together, putting down all of our political instincts and putting aside our differences, and I'm confident.
So how do you work together? Remember it was your predecessor, Mayor Brown, who said the supervisors are like mistresses that need to be serviced. I believe it was along those lines.
I wasn't on the board yet, so I didn't take that
But
personally.
I mean, what do? You do have occasional meetings with John Avalos and occasional meetings, I think, with Supervisor David Jew, who is the president of the board. But is there anything more that you can do or should do, Mayor, this budget cycle?
I've had them all over my house. I've been down the board and probably been in supervisors' offices in total and aggregate probably 100 times. I think Mayor Brown may have visited me once. And I'm not suggesting just because you walk down the hall.
Do you have the relationship you need, do you think, with the Board of Supervisors?
Look, we agree to disagree on issues, and we have a good working relationship. We do. I know people don't want to believe that because it's so easy to believe the headlines and focus on our differences. But at the end of the day, we're able to work fairly effectively together. A case in point, again, was last year's budget. Wasn't easy, but we worked together. We worked through it. We worked to address some of their concerns with add-backs, and we were able to get the votes. And so, no, I think there's a lot more in common that's advertised. I think the biggest problem is we're all the same party, so you get focused on process and personality a little bit more. It gets a little testier. Because it's not us versus them, it's not Republicans, Democrats. It's a different paradigm.
Well, from my perspective, covering the budget in the press room here at City Hall, is that you're absolutely right that at the end of the day, you come together. I wonder sometimes if you come together because you have to, because there has to be a balanced budget in place, because the process can be a pretty messy one, getting up to that point. Right. And in fact, there has been very, very sharp disagreement over different aspects of the budget that you had proposed to cut and then they wanted to put back in. I mean, case in point, Supervisor Avalos wanted to put a charter amendment on the ballot because you would not spend money for items that the board appropriated money for.
Well, yeah, after we had an agreement on the budget, the Board of Supervisors went forward to spend $13+ million we didn't have to give to one labor union. And I didn't think that was wise, and I didn't think that we would be able to service our obligations in the budget by moving forward. They got, they were upset about that, and this ballot initiative that had been around for a while was brought back to light, forcing us to spend money we don't have. I thought it was a terrible initiative, and to the supervisor's credit, he pulled back on it. I mean, it would, again, the burden and the gift of being mayor is you have to make the tough calls, and it's not easy. And if you take away that right and opportunity for the mayor to do that, you've got a dysfunctional government. You've got exactly what we have in Sacramento. And if you want to if we want to move towards the Sacramento model, be my guest. I'm glad I only have 2 years left because I want nothing to do with that. You need to have a system where we have checks and balances, but where tough calls can be made when they need to be made by the mayor, whoever she or he may be.
Okay, I want to throw out a couple of things that came from Twitter on ways that the city perhaps could make money.
Oh, now you're talking.
Ideas. All right.
Ideas. Thank you.
You ever thought about putting a bid out for WrestleMania? Always draws major dollars to the host city.
Brilliant.
Do you know what WrestleMania is?
Barbara sometimes reports on that down at the Board of Supervisors. Yes, I do know what WrestleMania. I love the idea. Those are creative ideas. Just the reason we're working with Larry Ellison to get the America's Cup, which is, by the way, 10 times bigger.
Oh, come on, a yacht race is different than WrestleMania.
No, I got you. Well, depending if you're out there on boats going back and forth, you may have maybe similar experience of competition. But look, all those. That's an interesting idea. I know it probably is a bit tongue-in-cheek, perhaps not. I think it's an interesting. We're always trying to bring more venues, more entertainment, more interesting
okay.
events.
A couple of other ones. One says this is also an idea that was floated by Mayor Willie Brown. I don't know if it was when he was running for office already in office. Bring gambling casino to Treasure Island.
No.
Okay, that's taken care of. How about, here's one more. Californians believe taxing and regulating weed will bring lots of dollars.
Yeah.
Do you support any of these measures being considered up in the State
It
House?
probably would. I don't know. Some suggest, we can solve our budget deficit. Not even close. The estimates are in the $1.5 billion range in the best case. The big problem with the initiative is it's preempted by federal law. And unless we have Congress and the President that are supportive, a state cannot enact a legalization strategy for cannabis. We can, however, support enhancement, as we have for medical cannabis, and continue to fight for the right of medical cannabis. Is this drug war a success? No, it's an abject failure. Is it time to have a robust debate around legalization, not just in the state? You better believe it. Is it a healthy debate? I absolutely believe it is, and I'm very, very supportive of the work that's being done to raise awareness around this issue and really start looking at the dollars and the cents, not just in terms of change, but the common sense around the particular issue of legalizing marijuana.
Well, it doesn't seem to make sense that we have a number, at least a dozen, maybe it's 20 medical cannabis clubs that are not being taxed.
Yeah, but can you tax something that is not legal? What are the implications of that? What are the federal implications of that? So if the state provides a framework
well,
do
they get a business license? Do they pay a payroll tax? I mean, it seems as though there should be
and that's
a mechanism.
And you recall, a number of years ago, Supervisor Mercury, myself, and others, we worked together to create a framework of regulation around medicinal marijuana in San Francisco. A lot of common sense around that. The board, to their credit, is considering additional ideas, including the prospect of some taxation along the lines of what's been done in the East Bay, that have to be done thoughtfully and, I believe, seriously considered. And I believe we have a process in place where we have a lot of serious people around the table looking at that, and I think it's appropriate to look at it. But again, it's just not as easy as some people think, that you can just immediately tax something or legalize something in the absence of changing federal policy.
Well, let me ask you about a couple of things that seem as though they should be fairly easy. Giving tickets to cars and trucks that double park.
Yes.
This is what one person wrote in about. They also suggested that police start giving tickets to people who jaywalk. Now, I don't know realistically how you do that. You'd have to ticket everybody in San Francisco. But then there's another issue that's been raised that I know the city can't do now, but we do have lobbyists in Sacramento, and that's charging people to park who have disabled placards. What do you think about that?
Well, okay, let's start back with double parking.
We're all in the kind of parking, walking, traffic.
Which I don't disagree. I mean, you want to improve Muni service, let's deal with double parking, particularly on transit corridors. One of the reasons we've doubled the fines of double parking on a lot of the transit corridors, have signs up. I actually helped legislate that as a member of the Board of Supervisors. We have forward-facing cameras on a lot of our buses that actually automatically will ticket people and send them a citation, and the buses are acting as parking control officers on an automated basis in order to discourage double parking on transit corridors. The issue of pedestrian enforcement, we do that in targeted way when we have issues and there's a lot of challenges, but we're not LA necessarily that's very aggressive about this, and this is something as it relates to making sure people are safe, pedestrians, bicyclists, and people in automobiles and buses, that we use in a targeted and rational way. I don't know if that's going to solve our budget problem to come with a massive clampdown on folks walking out of the crosswalks. Final point on the disabled placards. Look, the state law was just allowed and enabled city and county, as other cities and counties across the state, to substantially increase the fines for abusing the disabled placards. We have a more robust enforcement mechanism that I want to maintain in this budget through the MTA to go out and enforce that abuse. To the extent that we start charging people that may be severely disabled for the right to use it, I'm not there. I have strong support. I strongly support Americans with Disabilities Act. I strongly support access issues and enhancement. I don't necessarily want to create a burden on people that in some cases simply can't afford that burden.
Okay, let's go with another parking one. This just came from someone who wrote in, and it's something that has been brought up last year, and it's probably going to be brought up this year, and that's about meters, parking meters. Should they be enforced operate on Sundays and into the evenings.
Yeah.
What's your view on this right now?
I mean, I want to avoid this because I think there would be a huge outcry for the right reasons. You saw what happened in the East Bay when they started increasing the hours in the evening of meters. I understood that. As a business person, that's a big deal. As a former business owner in the city, I think we need to be cautious about that. So I'm not supportive of extending those hours. The Sunday is very interesting. I've had a lot of business leaders actually come to me saying we support Sunday meters, which was surprising because it could create more turnover in commercial corridors. Same time, I've had huge groups of members of the public saying, how dare you, not a chance. And so I'm more open to that debate, to be candid with you. I'm not concluding where I am on this because I'm open to both sides. I'm listening to both sides and processing it. And I've told the MTA and its director that I hope we have a robust debate on that. But the extended hours into the evening, I just think it's absolutely the wrong time in this economy to do that. And I think we'll have the kind of revolt that we saw in the East Bay. I just do not
What's
think that's
happening
right.
with the congestion fee for downtown? Is that dead or is
It's
it
not
still
dead.
being
It's being
studied?
processed. It's being studied.
So just to say again, that would charge drivers for going to the downtown corridor, financial district during rush hour.
Yeah, and there's sort of peak time strategies, and there'd be offsets for people that can't afford it, and there's all kinds of ideas. If it's a gateway strategy going in and out, or if it's a downtown strategy when you're already in the city. All that's being studied and processed. A lot of public input on that, not just in the city, but the impact that would have regionally with people commuting. Remember, this city is not just servicing the needs of people that use our water or the airport or other things. It also is servicing the needs of hundreds of thousands of people that visit the city and work in the city every day. And that's another reason our budget is where it is. We're not immune to that stress in terms of our services. So that's in the process. Is it top of priority right now in this economic climate? No. Is it the best time to now really bring this up and propose it when you have vacancy rates and businesses are deciding whether or not to go to the East Bay, South Bay, or North Bay, or we're trying to recruit businesses in and they look at the cost to their employees of commuting? Probably not, and that's why it's not necessarily front and center at the moment.
What do you think about the municipal transportation agencies' elimination of some of the parking control officers? This has created just a lot of confusion in the minds of people. Like, how can this possibly make
Because they generate money.
Because they generate money.
Yeah. They generate money if they're citing you. They don't generate money when, as Rachel said, they're out there redirecting traffic. So it depends how you use parking control officers.
But they could have been generating money by citing people.
But are they? So the question is, would people that oppose that support laying off those parking control officers that are redirecting traffic on Market Street? Or would they prefer those go out and start citing people for being 5 seconds late on their parking meter, or 5 minutes or 5 hours? So that's a policy call, and it's an interesting policy debate. I believe there's still performance issues in terms of the way we govern and manage the distribution of our parking control officers, and we can enhance revenue, I think, potentially with reducing the size of our PCO workforce. Then again, we, as you know, pulled back because of the public input, and we are open to argument and reassessing that. So I'm a mixed mind. It really depends what you do with the PCOs.
Could we talk a little bit about set-asides, because you kind of mentioned that in the beginning of our discussion, but I don't think the public still has a real clear idea of what role set-asides play in limiting the maneuverability of either the mayor or the supervisors to put together a budget. Yeah. What are the set-asides that we have? How much do they cost? Why do we have them?
You have state dollars that are categorical dollars that are set aside. You have federal dollars that are categorical dollars set aside. You have capital budgets that flow through our budget. It's one of, again, the reasons we have a $6.6 billion budget. It's not just people. It's not just programs.
I'm talking about the local set-asides in particular.
You have set-asides that the voters have enacted. Minimum staffing of police officers, 1,971. Prop F on minimum number of fire stations, or in essence, the equivalent of minimum number of fire stations. You have set-asides for Muni, public transit. You have set-asides that exist for libraries, for Department of Children, Youth, and Family, for services we provide for our youth. These set-asides were overwhelmingly supported in every case by the voters, overwhelmingly. And what that does is it takes your $6.6 billion, those state and federal, reduces it even further, and so you have a general fund that's over $2.5 billion, or roughly $2.5 billion, give or take, that is now cut in half yet again to that $1.2 billion figure where there's true discretion. Here's the good news, bad news. If you didn't have any of those set-asides, would you have as many fire stations? Would you have as many police officers? Would you have the Muni that we have today? Would you have libraries that opened up and opened their hours and extended them on Sundays? Would you have services for our youth like we do today? I don't know. A lot of folks think a lot of that money would just go back to the health department, and a lot of people think that's great. But then again, other folks think the health department budget's just too big and we can't afford it.
What do you think? Is it a good idea, the set-asides?
I think they are. I've supported them. I've supported a number of them.
And yet it's frustrating, I would guess, as a mayor, to have set-asides where the voters tie your hands and say this is where half of your general fund money has to go.
Yeah, I think we can overstate, though. If you remove them all, then your library system will suffer. I don't necessarily think that's a good idea. If you remove them all, I think your investment in working families, in the middle class, the work that the Department of Children, Youth, and Family do for child care, they suffer. I do believe we need more foot patrols. I believe we need more community policing, and I believe the police department budget could dramatically be impacted. And I do believe that when we have, not if, a major earthquake, one of the greatest godsends we have is a robust distribution of emergency personnel, the best and the brightest in our fire departments in every neighborhood in this city. And I think we'll rue the day that we started shutting down fire stations if we did. And I think Muni would substantially be impacted if we didn't have that set aside, and the voters agreed in all of those cases. But you're right, it does limit discretion. But we still have a fair amount of discretion, and within those set-asides, there's still ways to waive them in difficult circumstances. The minimum staffing for police, we've never met that until last year as mayor when I hit it for the first time, and it was just a moment in time, and now we're actually below. Prop F has a suspension clause in terms of the appropriation. There's ways of working
And then you
around
saw
it.
the creative way with the set-aside for Muni, where every department went with its handout saying, here's how we can get some of that money as well.
Yeah, but they've been doing that for years anyway, and there was a fee for service.
Stepped up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, if you want people answering the phones there, you're going to have to pay for it. If you want folks to provide services, we're going to pay for it.
What did you think of Chief Gascon talking to the supervisors last week and saying that he thought there should be a review of set-asides in his own department?
I thought it was courageous. I don't necessarily disagree with it, but I also believe it's never been met anyway, so it may not have been a big news story. I believe it's a good framework to encourage more community policing and more police presence in our diverse neighborhoods. And look, I want to remind people that homicides dropped 54% last year, the lowest since 1961. Violent crime dropped 10%, and our violent crime numbers are moving in the right direction this year, though the homicide numbers are slightly up. And I want to continue that progress, and I think Chief Gascon is the right person to do that job, and I'm going to defer to his judgment in terms of the management and organization of this department. But I don't think he's arguing for less police officers per se, but he is making the point that what was established in 1994 may not necessarily make sense in 2014.
Well, actually, I think the point that he was making was that some of the jobs that are done by police officers could be done by non-sworn personnel, by civilians, and excuse me, and if that was the case, you wouldn't need as many police officers.
Yes, sworn personnel. You may need the same number of people, but doing different jobs that not necessarily going through the police academy class to do certain work.
That's what Tom Amiano was pushing for when he was on the Board of Supervisors 10 years ago.
Sure he was, but so was Supervisor Gavin Newsom.
Right.
I mean, we all were, and so has this mayor. I actually have done the civilianization. I haven't talked about it. I haven't just had hearings about it. We've actually been pushing significant civilianization, and we've done it in the last few years.
Can I switch gears a little bit? We've gotten some questions both that came in earlier and that are coming in tonight about the school district. Now, I know as mayor of San Francisco, you don't have a tremendous amount of say over it, but the city has been providing some money.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit if there's anything with what you said 900 pink slips have gone out this week. Is there anything the city plans to do to try to blunt the potential, you could say, crisis, catastrophe of the school district if this actually goes through?
Yeah, if all of them go through, it would be. All of them won't go through. We've already committed $6 million. Supervisor Duffy, to his credit, is carrying that at the Board of Supervisors along the lines of what we did last year with, I think, $24-ish million and what we did in the previous year using our rainy day reserve. We have put in an unprecedented amount of money into the school district, not just the money that was prescribed by the voters with Prop H, another set aside, but also in in-kind services and other supported services. And so we're working very collaboratively with the school district, very closely. We have a memorandum of understanding, a partnership for achievement with the school district. It's probably the strongest partnership of any big city in America, and we're very proud of it, and we value it. And we have outstanding leadership there, and that leadership is very solicitive of support here, and I think that will be exercised yet again this year, and I think it will be a benefit to all the students.
Do you think there's more money that could be forthcoming
I think
the school district from the city?
Well, I don't know after this conversation. There's much left over. I mean, the fact is we're not in a position this year to do much more than what we're obliged to do and what we'd like to do as it relates to Prop H and as it relates to the rainy day reserve. But we're always open to creative ideas and solutions, and we're working with the school district.
And we also hear it with the community colleges now that are cutting classes and summer programs, and this is really the gateway for folks to move into some kind of career. When those classes are being cut down, it's going to take you 6 years or 7 years or 8 years to get out of college.
You're arguing for running for state office. Because all of these are state crises. I mean, all of this. I mean, you know, isn't it interesting that the vast majority of our discussion can have been addressed by just having different leadership in the state of California or different circumstances? You wouldn't have the Muni crisis, none of these Muni questions. You wouldn't have the street repaving crisis. You wouldn't have a lot of the discussions that we're having today as it relates to school cuts, except all of those are factored in dominantly and disproportionately because of the state of California. So again, it just goes to that interdependence. As we beat ourselves up, we also need to recognize that we are, again, not the United State of San Francisco. We're completely connected to the state of California, even though we outperform the state in almost every single category.
But the state of California is even in a worse budget mess than the city of San Francisco, and that's why it's trickled down to San Francisco.
That's right. And that's a great challenge. But we don't have a state economic stimulus. We don't have investments in preventative care to save the back end acute care. We don't have a focus, as we should, on public education and prioritizing early childhood education. We don't have a lot of the things that I believe, had we not had in San Francisco, we would have a much bigger budget deficit. We would have a much bigger challenge in terms of the social service mix. We've made a lot of smart strategic investments. Our tax cuts to biotech, you have 56 biotech companies. Our green tech efforts have created thousands of jobs in San Francisco, and that's generated millions of dollars in revenue. Our outreach all around the world to get people to visit the city. Our investment in people and place create a framework where people want to do business here, where people want to make investments here, and people want to spend money here. And that's why, perversely, for all the negative focus tonight in terms of the deficit, we're doing a lot better than most. Again, LA is talking about 4,000 layoffs. They have a huge budget deficit next year. Alameda County, San Jose, we're not immune from those same challenges, but at the same time, we have among the lowest unemployment rates in the state. Still too high at 9.4%. We still do things that are the envy of the nation, even in the economic boom times, and we'll still be doing them even after we make the tough choices in the next few months.
Back to the school district just for a minute. Given the financial support that the city has been giving the district over the past few years, and clearly will continue to, given the state budget situation, should the city have more control over the school district?
No. No. Why? It's a solution in search of a problem. From my perspective, I don't believe that we need to take over. I think we need to continue to advance our partnership. You know, some mayors think you take over the school district, and then I ask those mayors, well, then what? And then they have a hard time answering the then what question. My point is, why don't we focus on the then what and realize or rationalize whether or not we're on the same page? Turned out in San Francisco, we were on the same page. I'd rather strengthen the partnerships than the control. Look, the voters prescribed a focus on what we call SLAM, on sports, on libraries, on arts and music. That's a good and smart investment. We make investments in offsetting teachers' layoffs. I think that's a smart investment. I don't know that we need to necessarily have a bigger say in that respect. There is some discretionary money we give them, and I know the Board of Supervisors and some of us would like to be able to be a bit more prescriptive, but are we the experts? Are we the policymakers? I believe that expertise is at the school district, and I think they're better equipped to make those decisions.
And so would that go to the elected school board, or would you like to see the mayor, as there's been some discussion, the mayor appointing the school board as opposed to having an elected school board if, in fact, the city is backfilling so much of this budget for the district?
If we weren't getting along and if we didn't agree on our priorities, perhaps. But the fact is we're getting along and we agree on our priorities and we're working very collaboratively together. I mean, I think the majority of the school board members didn't even support my re-election for mayor. Yet we stand arm to arm, side by side, on vast majority of priorities in terms of focusing on truancy and dropout and preschool and after school and four-year college education opportunities, on investing in teachers and investing in our infrastructure. So I feel there's no real need to do that. There's nothing that necessitates the need to do that. And an outstanding superintendent and great leadership with Hydra Mendoza, who's on the school board as my education liaison. I think it's a model for the nation. I don't think we realize how lucky we are in terms of the partnerships in the city between the school district and the city family. And I think it's one of the reasons we have the highest performing school districts in the state of California, urban school districts. The reason we're making real progress in terms of enrollment going up, not just because of the economic downturn. We saw it before with kindergarten. And it's one of the reasons that I'm optimistic about our city's future, as difficult as things are for the school district, and as much as I recognize the hard work that still needs to be done there.
Let me go back though to the city budget a little bit. A question here: have any of your policies contributed to San Francisco's budget problems? And in hindsight, are there any programs or labor agreements, pro-business incentives, anything like that you supported that you now wish you hadn't?
Yes and no, sure. But I think we've made some pretty sound investments. I mean, I don't begrudge our investment in healthcare. I'm proud of that. I don't begrudge our investment in creating a customer service framework at 311 and taking 2,300 telephone numbers and aggregating them into one, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. A real human being answers the phone. I don't begrudge our investments in Care Not Cash and getting people off the street and getting stability in housing and supportive programs and supportive services and enhancements along the lines. I don't begrudge our $100 million contribution to rebuild public housing in the city. I think those are wise investments. Hope SF and those programs and our affordable housing commitments. I think the city structurally has to address its pension obligations. It has to address its benefits. And I think Supervisor Ellsburn and I and others are on the right track there. But we have to step up to the plate. And if we don't, we'll rue the day. This is the most dominant concern I have about the fate and future of the city, is being able to meet those obligations. I believe it's right to pay people for good work, and I believe in one of the most high-cost cities to live and to work in, that we should pay people a living wage and dignify that hard work. And we mark to market in most cases. Our police are still paid 1% lower than some of our peer cities. They have a little better benefits package. But we're not paying exorbitant. Some people suggest
something
otherwise.
Like pension reform, you have to sell that to the electorate. You did it a little bit ago. Was it 1 or 2 years ago of having with Prop B that you get vested after 10 years instead of 5 years? That's a pretty easy way to explain it. It seems that pension reform on the table now is pretty darn complicated. How do you get the message out to the voters? Is it simply a matter of trust us that something has to be done, or is there...
10 years, here's the message, simple. 10 years ago, the city, all in, Social Security, health, pension, retirement, active employees, the whole benefit cost $397 million. Today, it's about $897 million. I'm within a margin of error. $400 million, $900 million. In 4 years, it'll be 1.2 plus billion. Some suggest as high as 1.4 billion. Okay, how do you afford... Put everything else we said, how do you afford that? $120 million more this year than last year. Want to know why we have a deficit? It's one of the big contributors. How do you afford that? $120 million. Think of what we can do. There'll be no fare increases. We'll put more money into all these programs. We don't have any of these cuts in many cases of some of the things we talked about. I think we can cover pretty much everything we actually talked about for that. That goes up again and again and again, and it's exponential. It builds on top of itself. Good luck being able to manage that problem. And we better wake up to this. We better own up to this. And I'll tell you, this is a progressive value. If you want universal health care and preschool, and you want to invest in people in place, and you want to take care of the most vulnerable, then you cannot allow the budget to be squeezed out by these benefit costs.
How did we get here?
How did the state of California and the federal government get here?
How did San Francisco get to
We're
this
in better
point
shape than
with the
most.
pensions, though?
We're in better shape than most. We have a remarkably well-managed pension system. By any object, we're better. I mean, again, This bar is higher than almost anybody else. You have to put it in perspective.
So it's all about the investments going. I mean, is that generally what it's about?
It's about the investments going, and it's about making commitments in the past that when things were going brilliantly and beautifully, we thought we could keep. The state of Again, we by no means are unique in this capacity. What is unique is that we actually have a pretty well-managed retirement system. And Claire Murphy, who just retired, extraordinary work. And what's unique is we, because Prop B passed, are creating a foundation for all new employees that actually pay their health care and create a new pension for health care. In some ways, we're a model for almost every other city, but we're not out of the woods.
But isn't the basic problem that San Francisco, at the end of the day, gives more generous pensions? And when I say more generous, I mean that you can retire earlier for a relatively larger amount of money, particularly if you are in the public safety profession, than you can in the private sector.
But yes and no. The state of California has made very similar commitments, particularly to its public safety classifications. So yes and no. We didn't have, for example, Prop B, we enhanced miscellaneous retirement benefits. We actually were paying substantially less until Proposition B for all our miscellaneous, meaning most of our city employees, those miscellaneous classes, not the public safety classes. So yes and no. Yes and no.
Well, I said the private sector, not the public sector, and this state is the public sector, so one would expect it to be more similar. But certainly the pensions that are offered in the public sector, if you work for the city and county of San Francisco for 20 years, you can retire when you're 50 or 55, where you would be hard at a
in government generally.
Government generally.
Not just San Francisco. That's absolutely right, except it used to not be the case for the United Auto Workers. It used not to be the case for folks in the airline industry, and that's all beginning to change. The world is changing, and the challenges are enormous. And you're right. We're going through that change as we speak in the private sector, and now we're having that same discussion in the public sector because pension costs and those obligations on health care haven't been addressed at the federal level in any substantive way, and as a consequence, we're all feeling the stress of that.
And there's been several hearings now at the Board of Supervisors, and it's been interesting to hear Supervisor Ellsburn make these arguments, and his colleagues don't seem to be very impressed by them.
I want to be generous. It's an abdication of responsibility. An abdication of responsibility. Every single one of them have to own up. They know the facts now. Supervisor Ellsburn's done a brilliant job communicating it directly to them. And we have provided them an opportunity to make a down payment. By no means is this draconian reform on the backs of labor. Quite the contrary. It's about creating a system for prospective employees.
But it does sound like they are coming to some agreement on that, right? It's a matter of...
We've made progress. So that's the good news. But we need to make more progress. And we need to put this on the ballot. The legislation he drafted, the legislation we worked on, is compromised legislation already. And I know people want, it's the art of the deal. They need to feel like they got something else. If we water it down anymore, it's not worth doing. We need to deal with this forthrightly and honestly. And I think this is a good next step. Next step. And I know that scares a lot of people because it presumes there'll be yet another step in the future. But the math in this context doesn't work out unless we get serious around it. Okay. I say that as a Democrat and as a guy that respects labor and wants to fight for working people. But we have to own up to this.
This has been a really great discussion, and we just have about another 5 minutes, and we'd like you to take that time to summarize the past 2 hours and give the public that's been watching this evening an idea of where we are now and where you hope to be on July 31st.
Thank you. And thank you both again and for this dialogue and this interaction. And thank all of you for taking the time to tune in and write questions and express your comments, even those we couldn't hear, I'm sure, either at home, behind your computer, or behind your TV set. I want this to be the beginning of a conversation. I want this to be opportunity for you to engage, not just with pointing fingers and identifying problems, but also offering solutions. I'll take the WrestleMania to heart. I like ideas like that, creative ideas, and we want you to provide those to us here at City Hall. If you want to call in and you want to learn about how you can target those ideas to different departments, call 311. And they'll direct you to the right contacts. Provide that information as you provided your questions here tonight. Again, we're looking for solutions. We value public health. We value transportation. We value an investment in our streets and infrastructure, in our roads, in our playgrounds, in our libraries, in our health clinics. We value those priorities that you've advanced here tonight. We have to nonetheless deal with an unprecedented shortfall and the reality that we can't do everything as we've done in the past. I've always believed that healthy controversy is the hallmark of healthy change. Just because we've been doing it a certain way in the past doesn't necessarily mean we should be doing it the same way in the future. This challenge, this crisis, as some would describe, is also an opportunity to think differently and act differently. Yes, there needs to be some faith, but at the same time there needs to be a lot of hard work, and we want you to be part of that hard work. We want you to be part of the deliberative process. Don't just wait to see what I put out on June 1st with my budget. Help participate in these town halls, these open door days. Help participate by, again, providing us feedback and insight. And again, I just want to thank everyone for this opportunity, and hopefully we can do this again.
And you're doing it this weekend?
Saturday, right? 9:30 to noon. We have this remarkable town hall, though people have been randomly selected to be invited in this because we want it to be as inclusive of people that normally wouldn't partake and participate. But we also will be doing more open door days like I did last week in the Mission and the Tenderloin, and we're also going to be inviting people in to have other dialogues, not dissimilar to the one we're having this Saturday.
Mayor Newsom, thank you very much. I'm Barbara Taylor. Joining us for this discussion this evening has been Rachel Gordon from the San Francisco Chronicle. We're really happy that you were able to listen to all of this, and we hope that it gave you a little more information about San Francisco's budget. Good night.